Welcome back to another edition of the Friday Golf Podcast. I am your host, Andy Johnson. Today, I have an episode that is dedicated to the fall season of the PGA Tour. So with that in mind, I am joined by two of the people that I know that follow PGA Tour golf most closely. Sean Martin of the PGA Tour. He is the lead editorial at the PGA Tour, pgatour.com. And Joseph Lamagna, our very own Friday Golf, Joseph Lamagna. I had us each prepare 5 things about the fall that stood out. A lot of them overlapped. We ended up hitting on all of them. A few shared things, obviously, big storylines that came out of the fall. But excited to have you guys listen to this conversation. I thought it was super fun, free flowing. And a lot of it was about youth and the different tiers of the PGA Tour. So without that, let's get to our conversation. But before we get there, let's talk about Stripe. Stripe is a big part of our business, integral to this time of year, especially with Black Friday. You want to buy things online, Stripe is a great partner to do so. Stripe helps businesses as small as ours. They've been a partner of ours since really the founding, about 2 years after I started it. So about 2017 is when we started accepting online payment, and Stripe was there, helped us out when it was just me, small business. It also helps huge businesses such as Alaska Airlines, Hertz, and many other big businesses. So Stripe has advanced billing products. They have the standard checkout products. One of the big things with their checkout suite, one of the reasons people don't end up checking out of your store is because you might not accept their payment. Stripe accepts virtually like every way you could pay. I mean, they have it all covered, and that's one of the things I like the most about it. It makes it really easy for somebody to pay for one of our memberships, for example. So on the billing side, they can handle really complex situations like usage-based billing, monthly subscriptions, all that jazz. So if you want to learn more about Stripe, go to stripe.com. All right, let's get to our conversation with Sean and Joseph. Sean Martin, PGA Tour aficionado of golf, really just the living golf encyclopedia. We're honored to have you join us, Joseph Lamagna, who you often hear on here, is here also. We're going to do just a little takeaways from the fall season. You know, fall is over. We're on to the silly season. Could we call it the silly season? Is that the PNC father-son
the
hero?
challenge season for a while. And actually, the PNC is technically a PGA Tour Champions event. So that's PJ's yard.
PJ can't talk on this pod. He's just a producer.
Oh, that's too bad. I can see him. He's very excited.
He is excited.
There's been a lot. I've been a part of a lot of PJ-related conversations lately.
Because he's revolutionized Champions Tour coverage?
Yeah. What can we expect? What's this vibe going to be in Tucson? Should we be worried?
What do you think of his coverage? What was it? Were there any highlights from it?
You know, I definitely saw the buzzball coverage, the Cologuard coverage, but I appreciate just the sobriety with which he mostly covers the Champions Tour, just the weight he gives to it.
Yeah, I mean, he's a true professional. He's a journalism major from esteemed college. He brings professionalism to this organization.
100%. And look, if you're fresh out of Syracuse journalism school, you got to put him in front of World Golf Hall of Famers.
All right, let's get into this. This is enough about Champions Tour. I feel like this is more a conversation for the shotgun start than this podcast. We're going to talk about the fall. I had everybody prepare 5 fall takeaways, and we're going to talk just about this season. I'll jump off. I'll start this conversation. I'm going to pose a question. Is the fall almost golf sicko heaven? With a couple tweaks, maybe some better venues, some better coverage times. Is this like the perfect perfect golf viewing, if there was a little bit more strict relegation, could it get to the point where for like people that are so in the golf bucket that this is the quintessential viewing period where you don't care as much about the big names and it's just like pure relegation and players duking it out on good golf courses, like with a few more elite venues and a few better coverage times and stricter relegation, are we like almost to the most compelling part of the PGA Tour calendar?
I thought DJ Pyhowski summed it up perfectly in his tweet. It was something like, a Maverick McNealy, Luke Clanton duel is pretty good golf watching for November 24th. I think, guy chasing his first win, you had guys trying to keep their card. Luke Clanton obviously seems like an ascendant star. I think it is a confluence of all those different stories, and I definitely think so. I mean, I think the fall is made for the sickos, definitely. You're not going there for star power, right? The top 50 mostly are taking all those events off. You're going there for really granular storylines that truly the sickos appreciate.
I think similarly, Sean, the way the PGA Tour has changed their model with signature events and non-signature events, you just don't see as frequently the lesser known player competing against a player that's already kind of made. And you're getting a little bit more of that in the fall. You don't have some of the top superstars, right? It's not Scotty Scheffler versus Luke Clanton. But yeah, to your point, I mean, Ludwig was playing this past weekend. You could have had Ludwig versus Luke Clanton. Andy, I think it is kind of I don't know about heaven, but getting close to heaven for golf sickos. It's a pretty compelling product, but yeah, not for the casual golf fan.
That's the thing. I don't think it's all the way there. But yesterday I'm watching Caleb Williams dice up the Vikings on one screen, and I was almost more engrossed in the golf that was happening. You had four guys coming down the stretch. Yesterday's was kind of telling with, you had two guys that have had really great years, huge improvement years in Nico Echevarria and Mav McNealy. And then I think like Clanton was like the story of the summer that didn't get off the ground. It didn't get nearly the shine because of Nick Dunlap and also because of what Scotty Scheffler and Xander Schauffele did last year. I think that like that would have been almost every other year would have been like story 1B or C of the summer. But because of everything that happened last year, kind of got pushed down, and the fall was a little bit of a reminder. Especially this last event, he didn't play much all of the fall until this last event. But this last event was a reminder. Oh yeah, we forgot about how good this guy's summer was, and here he is. So, what's your first thing, Sean?
I think my big one's Luke Clanton.
This is one of mine too. I figured we'd have a lot of overlap here.
Yeah, I mean, I prepared 5. It could be 3, it could be 7 things. We'll see how it shakes out. But I think Luke Clanton's number one. Obviously, I'd watched his results from afar. On Friday, I took the time to take my son up to watch Luke Clanton and Ludwig Aubert and Matt McCarty. Thought that was a great feature group to have, and came away just totally impressed with Luke Clanton. I think I've tweeted a couple times like where he'd rank in all the different stats rankings if he had enough rounds to qualify. You have to have 50 rounds. He's at 30 now, but I mean, it's pretty astounding. He'd be second strokes gained off the tee, third in strokes gained approach, 11th in driving distance, and 5th in driving accuracy, and 1st in greens and regulation. And I kind of compared it to like Morikawa, but longer, of like this guy comes out in the summer. Some of the courses are softer because it's so hot out and so humid, and just flags shots and racks up gaudy approach numbers. And that's what Luke's been doing. And the variety of shots, too, was really interesting. He talked about how on his first hole Friday, he hits like this 9-iron that's like 5 feet off the ground. I mean, not literally. I think I looked at the numbers. I think it was closer to like 60, but still it was this low flighted 9-iron from I think like 100 yards. And Ludwig turned around and was like, that's sick. And he has this awesome stinger driver that I tweeted about after watching him too, that he hits quite a lot. He actually plays a driver with a little more spin than you would expect so that he can hit that stinger and keep it from falling out of the air. But it allowed him to hit this like low ground cut and access the right side of the fairway on this kind of split fairway par 5 that guys never are able to really go after because there's OB on the right. And I just think he has shots. He's a shot maker, which is really impressive for a guy his age. I think, too, there were a couple spots where Ludwig really pushed it with the driver. Luke laid back, hit wedges really close, and made birdies. And I think just, yeah, that shot making was really impressive, and the stats seem to back it up. Even if maybe they were on some easier golf courses, I still think the ball striking is really, really impressive.
Can I give you a different comp?
Sure.
For a player out of the gates that he reminds me of, and I think the finishes stack up just like stats wise and finishes. John Rahm.
Yeah, I mean, Rahm came out right away.
He was
finished second in his first event.
Yeah, he finished third at the Quicken Loans. I think like one of the things is like if you looked at his stats in that short period of time, they popped similarly off the tee and approached the green. Like where it was like, oh my God, like this guy might be the best tee to green player on tour right now, I
mean, TPC Deer Run is known for its wide fairways, but I mean, he's driving it, at least statistically, as far as Wyndham Clark and as straight as Chez Reavie.
You guys are going to make fun of me. I mean, another player that
never
he reminds me of a lot, Andy, is Cam Young. And the way that Cam Young came out through that fall.
Don't put that on him.
Come on.
Hold on.
2020.
Come on. We cannot compare anybody to Cam Young.
Whoa. Let me explain. Cam Young, when he came out in the fall, was shredding off of the tee. And it was hitting approach, not as well as Clanton, but he was a good ball striker. And we saw that translate so far in his career, 2 major championships. What's clearly held him back is the short game and putting, which Luke Clanton is much better than. So I'm not saying he's charting to be like Cam Young. He's charting to be better than Cam Young, but it's similar in that some of these weak fields through the fall, Cam Young did something similar off the tee, has the speed and accuracy combination that translates to major championship golf versus somebody like Tom Kim, who also put up really strong finishes in the fall, but was doing it more with the short game and putting. And he still had a good career, including in major championships. But the upside with Luke Clanton, I think, resembles some of the flashes we've seen from Cam Young, but with much better short game. Is that a fair comparison? Are you still going to get on me for that?
One thing I liked about Luke for RSM was I think he was towards the bottom of the field. He was negative in strokes gained approach and yet still second in greens and regulation. So he was missing it well. He maybe wasn't flagging short irons like he should have, but he was still hitting greens. And I think that's important because I think being anywhere on the green is better than being off the green almost, without exception. And so I think that shows good course management and kind of good ball control of controlling your misses. So I thought that was a promising sight. I don't know. I'd be curious. We have 30 rounds under our belt. We have 8 events from Luke. 4 top 10s in those 8 events, 2 runners up and a 5th and a 10th. And then I think the big thing though, too, he made the cut at the US Open. So you can talk about how, he played the John Deere, he played the Rocket Mortgage, RSM. These are all birdie fests, but he finished 41st at Pinehurst, which, I mean, that was a place that you really couldn't fake it. Didn't seem. That was a place that obviously flummoxed Scotty Scheffler. He tied Scotty. I'm not saying he's as good as Scotty, but finishing T41 in the same spot as Scotty is a pretty good showing there.
Sean, on that, I was looking through a lot of his scores, getting ready for this pod. Luke Clanton opened with a 76 at Pinehurst. Major debut, right? First major championship round ever. Second 2 rounds, he shot 69 on the second day, which the low round was 66. Hideki was the only player who shot that. So Luke was very close to the round of the day. And then on Saturday, he shot 69 again. The low round was 66. Like, he's showing flashes of playing top of the field in strong fields. It's not like he finished T41 with 4 mediocre rounds. Like, it was a little volatile, which I think you'd expect from a golfer who's just finding their footing.
First professional round.
Yeah.
True. Right.
For a guy, unlike Cam Young, who's, a city guy, this is a guy from small town Florida who, that's a big stage for him. So that was obviously maybe getting his feet under him in round 1 and then got comfortable and did what he did.
I think you just look at the landscape of what's going on. Dunlap, Clanton, Thorbjornsen's been really good out of the gates. Ludwig last year. And you see what's coming. And to be, I think one of the things is like these guys are more ready than ever to compete. I'm starting to wonder like how many of the top 100 players are in college right now.
So you could have 6 guys who have PGA Tour membership in 2025 who played college golf in 2024 with Dunlap, Clanton, if he gets to his 20 points, which maybe we can address that in a little bit. I stepped into maybe some hot water among amateur golf.
It seems like you stepped on a landmine you didn't expect there.
Did not expect that. Dunlap, Clanton, Thorbjornsen, Carl Phillips, who used his PGA Tour U status to get off the Korn Ferry right away. The PGA Tour U #1 for 2025, which right now it's David Ford at North Carolina. And then Gordon Sargent will be making his much-awaited PGA Tour debut as a member in 2025 after NCAAs.
I mean, it's fascinating. It's like a fascinating moment in the sport, because then you start to look at the Walker Cup, and there's like a lot of younger kids that are in consideration, like high school kids that might be even better than this crop of college kids. I mean, the sport is a fascinating, like, because like you look at like Blades Brown and Miles Russell and these kids that aren't even in college yet, that are, you know, potentially making the Walker Cup team. That's something that doesn't happen very often. Obviously, like the famous one's Brian Harmon, who made the team while he was still in high school. But I don't know. It's an interesting period in the sport, with like the game is kind of being decoded at earlier and earlier in players' careers.
Think to that, Andy, if you're a 28-year-old PGA Tour player and you're hovering maybe around like 70th to 120th, you're sort of battling for your status. If you don't get appreciably better in the next couple of years, like you're probably going to find yourself on the outside looking in with this youth explosion that's right about to bust in.
I think you look at the top 10 or top 20 in the world, and all those guys are guys who arrived quickly. They were guys we knew about in amateur golf. They got on the PGA Tour right away. There's not a lot of guys who anymore that have like the Jimmy Walker progression where, you know, he finds it at 35 and wins his first major and wins all of his events from like 35.
What about Xander?
Xander got on tour. So
he got on tour.
I think Xander...
And he won the Western Am, right? Or he got to the finals of the Western Am?
And he was the California State Amateur, or California State Junior champion, or no, State High School champion. I think Xander, because he started at Long Beach State, I think people were like, oh, he must have been overlooked. But really, Long Beach State had this coach, Ryan Ressa, who'd come from UCLA, and he was kind of building an ascendant program. And then, you know, went to San Diego State probably to be closer to his dad because of their relationship and his swing coach. And so Xander didn't go to Oklahoma State or something like that, but I think he had a very good amateur career, and then he got out on tour right away, and he won right away. I mean, he was 23, I think, when he won Greenbrier and Eastlake. You're not spending 5 years on the Korn Ferry Tour anymore, it feels like, and then winning a major. You might have a nice career. You know, a guy like Patton Kizzire has done that. He won in the fall. He's won 3 times now. But as far as like the top 10, 20 players in the world, these are guys I feel like just got out there right away.
I think like one of the other players I had on my list of just, I guess, you know, like it was more about like if you look at the winners, it's oftentimes like the big time player or bigger time player that was in the event that just popped down for a week. And one would be Austin Eckroat. And most people would say, oh, Austin Eckroat, like he's not a big name. He's only 25, right?
Yeah.
Like he's top 50. He's a top 50 PGA Tour player and he's 25, right? And he feels like he's been around the block, which is like he's been on tour for 2 years. I mean, the youth wave is pretty remarkable. And I think like Sean, like what you said, when you just scroll through the top, you know, top 50 in the world, it's like all these guys you knew of, like Sahith is a great example. He was #1 ranked amateur in the world, #1 college player in college golf. And then COVID hit. It took him a little bit longer. And I think that was like, if it was PGA Tour U era, he would have been #1 in PGA Tour U probably. You know, it's like, I do think like, and one of my questions I have just, and this is a little bit off topic, is like, how does PGA Tour U evolve? Because I think we're getting to the point where it's like pretty clear that maybe there should be more spots to get PGA Tour cars.
Yeah, I think that is something to consider. I think too, we're only 2 years into, you know, the #1 getting straight to the PGA Tour. And, you know, I'll be curious to see if this continues or if this was like, you know, just perfect timing. You had Ludwig and Thorbjornsen come out as your first 2 guys that went straight to the PGA Tour. Because these things do come a little bit in waves. I kind of laugh when everyone's like, oh, the youth movement is here. And I'm like, do you remember 2019 when like Matt Wolff and Colin Morikawa and Victor Hovland came straight out? You know, the class of 2011 with JT and Xander and Spieth. And so I do think, you know, as far as speed dominating the game, and, you know, we know that distance is an advantage and guys really pursuing it, I think it helps young players dominate, but these things do kind of come in waves a little bit, I think. And this could be just one of those kind of generational packages like the class of 2011 was for Spieth and JT and Xander when they kind of came out right away and made an impact.
You're erasing, wasn't Ollie Schneiderjans part of the class of 2011?
I mean, he finished what? He finished in the top 10 at the Open Championship at St. Andrews, along with Jordan Nieberg. He finished sixth.
I will not stand for Ollie Schneiderjans erasure on this pod.
He was, I want to say he won the Mark McCormick medal.
Yes, he was the number one player in the world.
Yeah.
I think he was, I saw something on Instagram. Did he have hip surgery, double hip surgery or something? I think so.
He's had a lot of health problems. And you had Anthony Paolucci also, who, he finished 29th at the Farmers Insurance Open when he was in high school. So golf's a funny game.
The good stuff, Anthony Paolucci.
I still haven't had a chance to clear up my Hogan Award controversy, but we'll get there.
But to your point, Andy, right? I guess putting it in a little bit more concrete terms, like the direction the tour is going, the top finisher from PGA Tour U is behind, in terms of priority order, the top 20 finishers from the Korn Ferry Tour in the previous season, and then the top 5 finishers from Q School. Might be worth considering how many of those slots go to PGA Tour U guys and exactly where they slot in, right? Like, I think you can make a pretty compelling argument that the second player on PGA Tour U will probably outperform the 18th player on the Korn Ferry Tour.
Yeah.
It's a reasonable thing to monitor, and the tour can watch that, right? And see how these guys perform over a period of time and see if they need to adjust it.
To me, the biggest thing is the venues that you play. And this is not supposed to be a knock at the Korn Ferry Tour, but it's very hard to get venues if you're not the PGA Tour. I think it's hard for the PGA Tour to get venues in some markets. It makes it even more difficult for the Korn Ferry Tour to get a venue to say, hey, you can have our venue for our course, whether it's a member run course, for a week every year. That's a hard, tall task. One of the things with college golf, because of alumni bases and influential alumni, they play awesome venues. Like you could make an argument that some of the top college golf programs play the best venues of any golfer in the world. You run down where they play in a given year, and it's like, wow, sign me up for this. So I think one of the things is looking at the top college golfers, just with how young the sport's gotten. I think you look at it and you have to take a step back and say, like, hey, these kids are playing better venues than the Korn Ferry Tour. And I think like the Korn Ferry Tour venue, they have like a little bit of a venue problem, because what you see is the courses they play and then they come up to the PGA Tour. They're apples and oranges, right? Like they test different elements of the game. Sure, there's some in the middle, I think, in that soft part of the PGA Tour schedule. Yeah, Sean, you talked about TPC Deer Run, wide fairways, lots of wedges, like those more mimic, but even TPC Deer Run compared to some of these Korn Ferry Tour events, like a drastically more challenging golf course. So I think that's like one of the things this isn't going to happen. I think it's just like there's a shortage of professional golf venues, and it's a big challenge that the PGA Tour faces. But like these college kids are playing a PGA Tour level golf course calendar leading into it. I think that's another aspect of this.
You also have, between NIL and PGA Tour U, there's no reason to turn pro early anymore. So these guys are all playing 4 years and coming out. And so they've made some money. They have some money when they turn pro, which also they have endorsement deals, but they're not coming out after 2 years anymore. We haven't seen that. I can't think of, a guy that's done like a Spieth where he turned pro after a year and a half. I think because the PGA Tour U carrot is so good, where you get PGA Tour status through it, then you have status basically for a year and a half on tour. And that is worth waiting for, I think, especially when you're already getting paid because of NIL.
We're talking about these young players in the sport, and I just want to reiterate, what if Akshay had gone to college? He'd be in this conversation too, like just with Dunlap and Ludwig and Thorbjornsen. Akshay's 22. he would be effectively like a college junior or senior right now. Like you'd have another like if he had gone to college and done the PGA Tour U thing, that means probably Thor Bjornsson doesn't get a PGA Tour card. Like that's the other aspect of this is like, what about the guys that don't go to college because they try and go pro or they're international players like Tom Kim would be another one like who would have probably taken up a spot in there. That's the other thing. I think that there are 3 or 4 players probably if you were doing it purely off of talent and scoring. I think you probably could make the case of top 3 PGA Tour U get a card in this current system. Joseph, what's your thing that you're watching?
My biggest takeaway was the youth explosion, Andy, and specifically with Clanton and Dunlap. Another huge note I have is that fields are shrinking. We that's well covered that the PGA Tour's field sizes are getting a little smaller, but golfers have no shortage of opportunities to have full status on the PGA Tour. Like something I was looking at, CT Pan, not to pick on somebody, but he had 22 starts on the PGA Tour this year. He had a 3rd place finish at the Mexico Open, a T2 at the John Deere, and a T6 at the Zozo. One other top 25, and he finished 102nd on the FedEx Cup points list. Like, understand some of the lesser, I'm not going to call it mules, so to speak, being upset about the tour getting smaller, but you have every opportunity to have your tour card. And I think looking at examples like CT Pan, I don't think 100 is too few golfers to have status.
I think like where I would push back is the no cut small event. I think that's where to me where it's going doesn't make a lot of sense because that just is like at its fabric anti-competitive. But I will say like a general question, and I think this is like a holistic competitive golf question. Do you value someone who plays well and that plays well and finishes in the top, 10 2 or 3 times a year and is kind of then not around very much more than someone that plays consistently, is like constantly a top 40 finisher week in, week out? Because I think that's like an interesting dynamic about how the points work, right? Where someone who consistently makes cuts and but doesn't have that breakthrough week, like for whatever reason, just like doesn't have the Saturday. Like what's crazy about like the difference between T32 and T8 is it's like I shot 68 instead of 66 or 65 on Saturday, and it's like it's the margins are so small between those two. I'm just, it's just kind of something holistically I always think about when we get to this time of year, because like that makeup of like your 100th player is usually someone who had 2 good weeks over the course of a 25-week schedule, or someone who just was like consistently above average for the whole year with no standout weeks. And I don't know, like I kind of like I think I favor the guy that's just like consistently above average than the person that flashes for 2 weeks at maybe a Detroit and Deer Run. Not to continue to slander those two.
Maybe I'm going to butcher this statistically, but I feel like kind of going off what Joseph said, if you have ample opportunity, you're going to have a start or two where your strokes gained for the week, deviate high enough from your norm that you're going to have a high finish. Basically, your ceiling is going to be high for those couple weeks. And then if you don't ever finish that highly, then your ceiling isn't that high and you're not that good. I think that I just feel like there's ample opportunity, like Joseph said, to have your great week. And if you don't have it in 25 starts, then you may not be that great.
Yeah. For me, it's how you do it, right? Like if somebody's consistently gaining strokes, especially tee to green, which we know is more predictive of how they're going to play in the future. Like it's a little more tied to how skillful of a player they are. That's a player that I'd want to keep an eye on, regardless of if it's one spike for the year, two spikes for the year. I think when you can kind of identify a fraud, so to speak, is they have like 3 really good weeks in strong fields where they're gaining a bunch of strokes putting. That propels them. That gives them enough points to have status on the tour next year. And then you see what happens when they get in stronger fields. Their ball striking numbers, they'd have to putt extremely well to even finish in the top 20. So, I mean, Andy, to what you're speaking to, the way that points are given out isn't linear, right? If you finish with a good finish and a bad finish, you're going to get more points than 2 average finishes. So I hear you, but I think you need to look at it a little deeper, that it's about how they're doing it. And if they're doing it with the ball striking, especially in strong fields, that's what I'd be paying attention to.
All right, like Luke Clanton and Cameron Young.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good example. It really is.
All right, I'm going to go to my next one, Maverick McNealy. I feel like he was one of the players. Obviously, he's the winner of RSM. He was one of the players, when you look at year-to-year stats, one of the biggest improvers, gained a ton of strokes off the tee. Comparatively, distance was up. And I think when you looked at it, he was one of the players in the fall series where I don't think his like necessarily performance in 2024 matched up with where he was in the FedEx Cup and the OWGR and everything, in terms of he was playing a lot better golf than maybe his finishes showed. And winning this was a big one. And I think like he's kind of the example of what we're talking about. Maybe potentially a late bloomer, even though he might have bloomed. He might be the rare example of someone who played some of the best golf of their life at age 21 and then, managed to refine the gear at age 20. What is he, 28 now?
29.
Refine the gear at 29. I thought this was, Clanton would have been a great story, but to me, this was the second best story on that leaderboard on Sunday. And I was really happy to see him get the win, because I do think he is a player that could potentially elevate into that signature player. And I think also like his voice and the leadership aspect of the tour has been pretty refreshing.
I think he shows a couple things. One, I think he shows how unpredictable golf can be. You see the resume at Stanford, you think he should have come out right away. And then I do give him credit for just, I think, really reinventing himself a little bit when he was playing so well at Stanford, even when he first came out. I mean, he was kind of like Joseph said earlier, he was doing it with the putter, and the ball striking was meh, and the putter was covering up for a lot of mistakes. And then he got injured. He added distance. I think in response to getting injured, he got stronger to avoid the injury. He changed his swing, became a better driver. And even he said it in his winner's presser. He said, I've had periods going back to my amateur days where I putted really well and hit my irons really well. Then I got the yips, the full swing yips, when I turned pro and first got on tour. And I think he's been able to really just keep improving, which I think is harder said than done. And he's done it. And now he's turned himself into that player, like Joseph said, that relies more on the ball striking than the putting, and is a more sustainable player than he was before.
I read the article Cameron Morfitt wrote about his on PGAtour.com, a website
Great
that
website.
You're part of, Sean, where I thought it was great, like Scott Hamilton, great PGA Tour coach, coaches a lot of top players. I love the idea of how he works with players where like, show me a video when you were playing your best golf and let's work to that point. And like that idea of like, everybody's trying to reinvent. Like, I'd love some players on tour to do this. Like, could Jordan Spieth do this? Like, show me a video of when you were playing your best and go back to that. Like, that to me is super powerful. And I thought like a really interesting way to teach. Like, here, show me what your best was and let's work back to that.
It could be instruction. Andy, the other thing I was going to throw in is that Michael Kim had put this out this morning that he talked to Mav McNealy and he just found a new driver that he liked. And sometimes you see that where whether it's technique or equipment, make a little change and the results get a lot better. So I'm with you on the instruction kind of matching up with where they felt the best. I think some of it can also just be equipment, and sometimes guys' sponsorship deals holding them back. I'm not sure that was the case with Mav McNealy, but finding a new driver and then getting better performance is not that rare of a phenomenon.
Yeah, he became a free agent this year. He talked about, too, his old caddy before his brother Scout got in the bag, sent a set of irons to him that kind of helped encourage the swing changes he was making of swinging more left and not getting as under it. But, looking at his stats for the season, he was 23rd in off the tee, 10th in around the green, 29th in putting, and then the one kind of weakness was 118th in approach to the green. So 3 solid portions of his game. Obviously, you'd probably like to see the approach play be better for kind of sustainable success. But, I mean, if you're driving it well and putting it well, you can, I think, find ways to get it done.
He seems like he's gearing up to be one of Joseph's favorite wedge fest assassins.
Well, the other thing, I mean, he was 188th in strokes gained off the tee last year. I mean, we're talking about a horrible. I think there were like 190-ish guys each year in the stats. So, I mean, we're talking about one of the worst drivers on tour last year to one of the best this year. And I think he talked about he was getting way under it, which caused you to flip at it, hit hooks, which is not a recipe for good driving. I
was going to say, you're right, Andy. The lack of strong approach play, especially in good fields this year, and not a lot of major championship success. Like if you're putting your boots in the ground that you think, hey, this is going to be somebody that breaks out next year, I would love to see it. I might take the other side of that a little bit. It shows some signs of like not the ball striking in elite fields to have this major leap to be like a top 25 player in the world.
I think the reality, though, about the PGA Tour schedule is you can break out and just break out on golf courses that fit your game. I think that is like one of the things I think that's becoming more and more abundantly clear with the tour is that there are players that play well everywhere. And I think statistics are helping tell us this story a little bit more. And then there are players that play well at certain types of golf courses. And there's room for both of them. And I think if you think about it in terms of like another sport, I know Sean's a big baseball guy, but it's like, you have your starting pitchers who are, now throwing 5 innings, 6 innings, or whatever it may be on a good day. Those are your guys that have nasty stuff, have all the pitches, and then you get into the bullpen and you have like, who is the pitcher? Was he the Dodgers pitcher who threw like 18 straight changeups?
No, it was the guy on the Yankees who he used to be on the Dodgers. I forget his name now, but it was like 60 in a row.
Yeah, it's like he's just a changeup specialist. Like I was like, wait, wouldn't that just be like a fastball then? If he just going to throw the changeup all the time?
It was befuddling because I'm like, how do you not time that up at some point? You've seen like 10 in a row. Can't you just just wait, man? Just wait.
So to me, like if you think about golfers in the way of like a baseball pitcher, you have room for all these guys just because, again, going back to like the earlier conversation, like golf has a venue issue. And I think it's because of how much speed and distance that technology has enabled to be in the game. Is that like you have this like everybody hits it far, and there are only so many venues that can provide that well-rounded test that we crave, and it's just hard to. There's might be 15 venues in the world that provide a test of golf where we see like, wow, like this really makes them think and have to hit shots that are different. Like there just aren't many of them. So I think that's one of the challenges in the sport. Sean, what's another one of yours?
I think we were talking about the young guys. I think when I was really looking at the fall and some of the results, it actually was a good fall for the old guys. You had
General
a couple.
Patton.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I do want to get to Kevin Yu at some point. I kind of like his trajectories.
Yeah.
All right, we'll get there. But when you look at the guys who moved into the top 125 in the fall, you've got David Lipsky went from 165 to 97. He was 36. Campos was 36. Kazier's 38. McCarty is 26. I think we can talk about him too. But Berger was 31. He moved into the top 125. Grayson Sigg was 29, Henrik Norlander's 37, Alex Smalley's 28, and Sam Ryder is 34. And, Lucas Glover played well in the fall. And I think that we made that point about the elite guys. They come out right away and they identify themselves right away as elite talents. And I think that's the case. But then there's something in that kind of middle tier where I think the experience puts you over the edge. I have this theory and I haven't looked at it really, but too deeply. But, the guys who are like 101 to 200 in the FedEx Cup and, maybe the top 75 guys in the Korn Ferry, kind of looking at the guys that, used to play in those Korn Ferry Tour finals, those guys I feel like are pretty similar strokes gained wise. And I think where they go the next season, whether they, earn their tour card or keep it or they get demoted, I think it really comes down to a few well-timed shots in the season. Like one year you make that 6-footer on 18 to finish solo second instead of a three-way tie for second, and that's enough points to get your card. Or, you miss that putt. Or, you birdie the last 3 on Sunday to finish fourth. And I think that all those guys are kind of just separated by a couple well-timed shots. And I feel like in the fall, where I think that's an opportunity for young guys and KFT grads to really pop because they're playing consistently, we didn't actually see it a ton. There was no real, Thor Bjornsson played very well. He missed a bunch of the fall because he sprained his knee in Utah. And obviously McCarty came out and won. But really the fall, I feel like, was a time for, let's say, the veteran players. And I think that when you get to the kind of that middle tier of the tour and the Korn Ferry Tour, I think experience matters, if that makes sense.
I mean, you look at a guy like Henrik Norlander.
Yeah.
Like, he's just been in this position so many times in his career that I think like there is like a gravity to the fall, like where it's like, oh man, like you see the set number of events that you have and like you can fall pretty far. Like you can go from, I don't know, probably 85th to out in that stretch of time. I don't think that's unreal. And it's like, I have to play well, like, and I think there's like even if I have to play well 1 week, and when you don't play well the first week, it becomes heavier and it just continues. And somebody who's played a lot of golf probably knows how to compartmentalize a little bit more. It could even be a huge advantage if you have a life like kids and a family versus being single and this being the only thing, that I think that could be an advantage to this, where like you leave the golf course and there are other things that take up your mind other than what's going on over this eight start stretch.
Well, I think we in the media too, we gush over the Luke Clantons and Michael Thorbjornsons, and they are elite talents, or they seem headed that way. But when you get down to it, there's still a lot of guys who maybe they've been around for a while and they're not the sexiest storylines, they're not the young up and comer, but they just know how to golf their ball.
Well, also, like, I mean, Lucas Glover was Luke Clanton, 25 years ago or whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, he was a stud. He was a stud at Clemson. And
they may not do what Joseph said and like dominate in elite events, but you get them into kind of your standard run of the mill PGA Tour event, fall event, and they can get it done.
I was just going to say, like, one of the best examples of that, I feel like, is Matt Kuchar, who obviously is great golfer. Like, will probably go down as one of the most underrated players to play on the PGA Tour in the 21st century. You look at his results this year, it was bad the first half of the year, especially in strong fields. Then once he pieces it together a little bit, like, he's pretty consistently gaining strokes in some of these weaker fields. The Wyndham, which will be remembered infamously for him finishing the next day, right? T12, T13 at Silverado, T14 at Shriners. Like, you get a golfer like that who's crafty and knows these golf courses, who's probably just frankly better than some of these up and comers that haven't cut their teeth yet. Like, they're going to show it in the non-signature events.
You know what kind of reminds me of? It reminds me of when like certified NBA players are out of the rotation and they send them down to the G League.
Yeah.
And it's like, this guy scored 42 and 10 assists. And it's like, wait a second, he averages like 6 points a game in the NBA. Like, it's
Phil,
like
Phil winning on the Champions Tour right when he goes out there. Like, it's a very similar dynamic. These fields are quite different in field strength.
Yeah. It's I think that's it's a good point. And I think like one of the things is like we have like almost like a growing Could it be fair to call them like middle class golfers because of the youth invasion? Is like one of the things that we have is like we have a bigger middle class. Like if you're not like really great at age 30, you just like go into this bucket.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's kind of what I was, describing with the guys who are just separated by a well-timed shot here and there, and that kind of determines if they're PGA Tour players or they're Korn Ferry Tour players for the next season. I think there's separation among those top 10 and top 20 players in the world. I think Joseph kind of touched on it in your pod with Ryan French about, we talk about small margins, and there are small margins between 125 and 126 and 30 and 31 on the Korn Ferry Tour, but the margins between 1 through 10 in the world, 1 through 20 versus number 125, I think are pretty big.
I mean, you look at JT Poston, who's kind of I don't know if I'd call him a bona fide signature event player, but he's a good PGA Tour player. Played twice this fall, won and finished T5. Those courses might suit his game a little bit, but like that's what happens when a player who's well above the average in the field shows up.
Yeah, that was one of my notes, is just like, if you look at some of the winners, and this ties in well with Sean, is like you look at it as like McNealy, Austin Eckroat, JT Poston, I think Kevin Yu I'd put in this bucket. It's like, you take away like Campos, which was a good story, and obviously I think like there's something about Campos and playing in windy conditions that islands present that he becomes one of the better players. But you look at those players, like those are all certified PGA Tour players, and they've proven, it over a long period of time, or not long, but like, Eckroat was in the top 50. Like they just bounce down and they win these events.
The average age of winners in the fall was 30.1. So it wasn't like, it was like half the guys were in their 20s and half were in their 30s, but it wasn't a bunch of like spring chickens, guys fresh out of college, fresh off PGA Tour U. I put Kevin Yu in that fast riser bucket though.
I have him too. I wanted to talk about Kevin Yu. I think he's like, this is a guy that was top 5 in PGA Tour U and is basically just cleared every echelon as he's gone up. It's been super impressive.
Yeah, he came straight out. So he turned pro in 2021, and that's when Korn Ferry Tour was having that like 18-month season because of COVID. 4 straight top 25s to start his pro career, a T5 and then a playoff loss. Then he gets his PGA Tour card after one full season on the Korn Ferry Tour 2022, keeps his card in 2023 and wins in 2024. And just, the profile is there. He's 12th in off the tee and 36th in strokes gained approach, but 155th in strokes gained around the green, 153rd in strokes gained putting. And his results are very volatile, and I think it's probably just weeks where he happens to shake them in putting-wise, which I think everyone can do, even the worst putters. Then he has good results or he wins. And obviously there's room for improvement with the short game, but the ball striking skills are there.
A hypothetical question that I've had, and I think like when you look at Kevin Yu, is a good kind of like it'd be nice to look at all players. But how much of a improvement can we expect around the green and putting simply by not having it be your first time around all the golf courses on the PGA Tour? Like that, to me, thinking about it from a playing perspective, has to be a massive, massive advantage when you're talking about not only your second time around, when I say that, like your second season playing the same courses. For the most part, like the tour, like once you've played these golf courses 5 or 6 weeks of your life, in your 5th or 6th season, you have such an advantage on the greens. Like I think about like when I go back to a golf course, like one of the golf courses I grew up caddying at. I caddied there so many times, like I don't even have to read putts. Like I go onto those greens, I feel at home. I make everything. When you play the tour year in, year out, you gain familiarity. You understand where to miss. Your around the green numbers should theoretically go up, and on the green numbers should go up. They should improve with experience. Like to me, those are 2 spots where you would make market improvement just by not being the one that's seen the golf course the least on tour.
A couple things there. When I went up to watch Ludwig and Luke Clanton and Matt McCarty on Friday, I was talking to Luke Clanton's coach, is Jeff Leishman. He's been around for a long time. He's a top 100 coach. He was Berger's coach when he came up. And
no relation?
No relation to Mark, no.
Is he a big guy?
fairly big. He's Canadian though, but he made the telecast. If you could see him talking to Luke while he was warming up after his round on Sunday for a potential playoff. He's in there talking to him. But I just made a mention about strokes gained around the green, losing strokes there, and he said the short game shots just that are demanded out here are much different than in college, and so it's just a matter of learning those. So I do think the experience of being on tour more, you just learn those different shots. And then also, I think the way strokes gained around the green is calculated, some of it I think could come down to target selection, because around the green is basically, it takes your lie and your distance from your pin. So if you're short-sighted, it's an impossible chip shot in real life, but the computer's looking at it, it's like, well, you're only 20 feet from the pin and you're in the rough and you just hit it to 30 feet. It's going to severely dock you. And so if you're short-sighting yourself a bunch, which I don't know if Kevin is, I didn't break down his shot trails, which maybe I should have, but if you're short-sighting yourself a bunch, your strokes gain around the green, you're going to get hammered in that because you're not chipping it close proximity to the hole. And so that also could be a target selection issue as well.
I think one of the things I noticed with the PGA Tour, and this is just a general observation, everybody's like, oh, they have these courses. It's such, they're so soft and easy. The pins, the hole locations on tour are insane. They are insane. They are just shoved into corners, so inaccessible. Compared to a regular golf setup, at your club or course, if you put PGA Tour pins out, your course would play 4 shots harder. I'm convinced. They are you just a regular golfer cannot get at the pins. Good shots are 20 feet away. I think that's something that the general fan, casual onlooker does not understand about a PGA Tour setup is the pins are insane.
I think, Andy, with that, I think you'll hear a lot of older PGA Tour players say that is different than 20 years ago. It has gotten appreciably harder, and not to turn this into a distance issue, but when you talk about scores going down over the past 20, 25 years, that's something that I think goes overlooked a little bit, is that they've also made the pins, they've cranked the greens up and put the pins in extremely difficult locations, oftentimes right at the top of a slope or where it's really hard to read the putts. You hear golfers talk about this all the time. The pins have pretty much been pushed to the max.
Mm-hmm. And the other thing too, we forget how much players still can improve after they get on tour. I did a podcast with Brian Harman earlier this year, and you'd think Brian Harman was all everything phenom when he came out. He 2 Walker Cups, U.S. Junior Champion, #1 amateur in the world, and he talked about how he sought out, after going on the PGA Tour, he sought out Jim Furyk for advice on chipping because he was having trouble hitting the high soft shot out of Bermuda. And he loved the way Furyk did it. And he looked at the stats and I think Furyk had the best proximity from the rough around the green or something. And so Brian Harman, this guy who you'd think would know a ton, is still seeking out Jim Furyk for advice on how to chip. And so for a guy like Kevin Yu, there's room for improvement probably in picking the brains of tour players on how to hit these shots, or picking the brains of coaches. And also goes back to that thing of the wily veterans who separated themselves in the fall. Guys are still improving even when they get on tour. They don't arrive on tour as finished products.
All right, let's take a quick break here to remind you guys about Club TFE. Club TFE is our membership. This is a great gift. It's holiday gift time. A great gift for the golf lover in your life is a Club TFE subscription. It's our membership. It is the place we write probably outside of the newsletter the most. So you get tons of content. A lot of it centers around golf architecture and golf courses, as well as a bunch of other benefits. You get early access to our events. You get a discount in the pro shop every day of the week. We have a Black Friday deal going right now that's a better discount, but every day of the week, whenever you need something, you get that. But it's really the way to stay in the know. So if you are interested in Club TFE or interested in gifting Club TFE to someone, go to thefriday.com/membership and you can learn more there. All right, let's get back to Joseph and Sean. Joseph, what else do you have on your list?
Other big takeaway I have that hasn't been covered yet is a player who I don't know where you guys would categorize him, if he's in the middle class, if he's an up and comer. Not an up and comer, but I'm pretty excited about the return of Daniel Berger. And I mean, he's not an up and comer. Was he 31? But
yeah,
Daniel
same
Berger,
age as JT.
He was on quite a trajectory before getting hurt. And I mean, I don't know if you started watching golf in like 2021 or 2022, he'd probably be on the short list of golfers that you don't appreciate enough. I was looking at some of his results today. In 2020, he went through a 9-event stretch where he had 7 top 10s and a win. And one of those events was a T13 at the PGA Championship. Berger's got the pedigree. He's done well in majors. He finished in 2 top 10s in the same year in 2021 in major championships. Just dealt with an injury, and now he's climbing his way back. Loved his quote this past weekend that if he plays at a 10th of his potential, he's in a completely different class than a lot of these golfers he's playing against. Like, I like the swagger, and he's right. He speaks to this difference in levels that we've been alluding to throughout this pod. Like, if a bona fide signature event level player shows up, like, they get the job done. He almost won the RSM this past weekend. I think Daniel Berger is somebody, now that he's healthy, you really got to consider him as being a potential like top 30 player into 2025.
My only concern there is the back injury seemed really severe. And so you wonder how banged up he is, how much that's going to limit him maybe in practice and prep and reps, and then how long he can stay healthy for. I don't know. But
did you see him talk about it this week?
I didn't.
He said he played 27 holes on Tuesday trying to get ready because he hadn't seen this golf course before, and that his back feels 100%. So we'll see what happens with that, but that's a legitimate concern, but it seems to be in a pretty good spot.
He's also working with Mark Blackburn now.
Oh, number 1 coach in the world.
Yeah.
That's I think like with Berger too, when you have something like that and you see, I think he probably looks at his career and he looks at what Brooks Koepka's done. He looks at what Justin Thomas has done. He looks at what Jordan Spieth's done. And I think he probably thinks he's as good, if not better, than a lot of those guys in his own mind. Whether or not he is another question. But like, I think like he's the quintessential tour pro, like elite tour pro, where they are irrationally confident and have like extraordinary self-belief. That is like, to me, like when people ask me what are tour pros like, it is like they have more confidence than you can ever imagine. Like most golfers walk around thinking about how much they suck. They are the ones that like never think they've hit a bad shot in their lives. And that quote is like very telling of how Daniel Berger views his golf game. I love it because it tells you that like he is probably someone who believes that his career has been a disappointment to date. And I think with all the wealth in the sport, all of the money, it gets very hard to be dedicated and driven at age 30, 31. And I think he's one of the people that you could look at and say, you know what, this guy might still want to be great.
He also hasn't seen that money, right?
Yeah.
He wasn't playing when the purses got huge and he didn't go to live. So he's not somebody that's had a taste of that influx.
He could get a bigger
cash.
boat.
One of the things, the back was so bad he couldn't go on the boat.
That's what he said.
The water, the rocking was hurt his back.
One of the things I think about with all the time is a PGA Tour player once told me, who he had good success, is that he told me, like, if you look at when a bona fide PGA Tour player gets relegated down to Korn Ferry, they immediately are back. Like, it is like, just like, no doubt about it. They go down to Korn Ferry and they are just immediately back up. And I think this is like what we've talked about. The themes of this conversation are like, when there's a top echelon player playing in the fall, or the Deer Runs, or the Rocket Mortgages, like, it's always like Tony Finau. I feel like Tony Finau is always the top ranked player in Rocket Mortgage and 3M. And it's like, sure enough, there he is at the top of the leaderboard. John Rahm, when he played the Mexico Open, sure enough, there he is right in the mix, no matter how well he's playing. Like, it is like an interesting dichotomy that's starting to come out. I think this is just with the tour. It used to be that, in the 90s, this probably still would have been the same true in the 90s, but everybody played everything because they had to, the wealth wasn't at the level where you could get reduced down to a 18 a week's year schedule. My last thing for the fall, I thought Black Desert was super fun. I was like, I haven't gotten like, I really liked, I would like to see the best players in the world play Black Desert, to be completely honest. I thought it was a super unique test. It was really fun golf course. And then in terms of like a television product, so stunning visually. The lava, the mountains, the very lush ryegrass. And then also the time of day that it's on. Like, it provides a really nice TV window. I know it gets really hot there, but could we get Black Desert into like May? Could we get it in the May zone? Like, when sports are kind of dying down, and then you get this like kind of primetime golf.
I mean, it's in a desert, right?
Yeah.
I'd probably shoot for winter. I mean, maybe can you tack on the end of the West Coast swing?
I think St. George in May, you could. I'm just trying to get it to where the daylight matches up, and you get the like primetime golf.
Okay.
Well, I mean,
that's
the problem, Andy. Like, I'm with you. I think it's by far the best venue of the fall. If you took it out of the fall, like, the fall would take a big hit. I kind of enjoy looking forward to a good venue in the fall, like Black Desert. If we just start taking all the good ones like Memorial Park and deciding that they need to go where the top players might play them, I think you end up with a fall that's pretty lackluster, which we mostly have at this point, with the exception of Black Desert. Do we have to get rid of the one good one?
I'm not going to stand for the Sea Island slander.
Ugh.
I think it's probably one of my 12 to 15 favorite PGA Tour venues.
Agreed.
This is not a take I thought I was going to get on this podcast. I mean, I'm glad I did. I think the point you made about like a TV product, like, it's just something that pops and you turn it on and you're like, what is this? This is so different.
But and it's almost the option to have it on at night. Because April, the highs in St. George are 70, average high is 76.
That sounds perfect.
May, the average high is 86. So to me, if you move it into that area, like, it's a great TV. Like, this is like and especially if you get your best players playing there, I think this could be a great event. Honestly, like, there aren't many opportunities for there to be great events on tour where you have like a very interesting and different test. Like, I think like what I loved about it was there was enough space where you could go out there and rip driver, and distance is a huge advantage, but there was the trouble made it so that you had this great mix of like short, accurate players and long players. And it was one of the more compelling tests. Like, what we need in golf is more lava, is what I'm convinced. Just, we got to be shipping in lava everywhere.
Should we take the regular tour to Hawaii? Just take it from PGA Tour champions?
No, Andy, your point about it, there being enough width, but it crushing wide misses, like, that's a great example of a course that if Bryson DeChambeau were still on the PGA Tour, like, I think a lot of people would assume that he'd do great there, and he wouldn't necessarily, because the way Bryson hits it, any mishit shot at his distance, it's like a full shot and a half penalty. You were not playing those shots. They were almost all unplayable once they got off the fairway. So I would love to see better players tackle that course.
I think we should just, like, when we talk about venues, and I think like everybody just thinks like, oh, this guy, he just likes like Riviera. What we want out of our tour venues is we want diversity. And we want to have courses that bring out different skill sets, because otherwise it just becomes too one-dimensional. Like, the venues, to a certain extent, like, outside the top players the very best are going to play well everywhere, right? but the venues to a certain extent dictate who the top 50 players in the world are. And I think like that, like you need to have venues like Black Desert where the best players go play, because it offers a completely different dynamic. Like it would be, I'm not a car racing person. I do not watch this, but if every car racing track was the same exact dimensions, it would not be interesting.
Well, I think in NASCAR they are.
Well, that's probably why NASCAR is not as popular as F1.
I think the Tour, Andy, would argue that they already have a diverse set of courses, right? That Harbor Town is completely different from Riviera, which is completely different from Bay Hill, which is completely different from Muirfield Village. Travelers.
Yeah. What is the Travelers test?
Nothing.
Is it anything? Nothing?
How many people will show up to a golf course that doesn't provide a test, I think, is what the Travelers test.
Well, lots of people show up when there's $20 million on the line.
Great wedge players.
All right. Who's got stuff left over?
I want to talk about the Maxes. I feel like we're up for an exciting year for Maxes in general. Homa's trying to work his way back and get his swing back. And then I have the yips already on it, but Max Grazerman and Max McGreevy both had great falls. And it's already a struggle. So McGreevy was number 2 on the Korn Ferry Tour points list in 2024. He got a sponsor exemption into Utah and finished 11th. But the bigger thing was he won the Dunlop Phoenix over.
Knew you were going to go there.
Akshay and Hideki. And then he actually just won the TaylorMade Invitational at Pebble, which is kind of a hit and giggle, but they've got tour players there. It's a nice off-season event, and he seems poised for a big 2025. He's a guy he's 29 and had to bounce back and forth, so I think maybe he could be an exception to all the things we've talked about here, but he's a guy who I think I'm looking forward to. And then obviously Max Grazerman, he showed up in the fall and continued doing what he did at the end of the year. He finished second at Zozo and fourth at in Mexico. And so I think top 4 finishes in his last 6 starts. He was second on tour in strokes gained putting this season. So it'll be interesting to see if that was a hot putter situation or if that is a sustainable thing. But Max Grazerman was your top Korn Ferry Tour graduate for the 2024 season. And so I think just a lot of action around Maxes for 2025.
Also somebody that got the Zurich
take it
boost.
to the max.
Did Grazerman? Well, he did, but he also finished runner-up in the back-to-back events before the playoffs, so he earned his way in.
I agree with Smartin's Grazerman take. He's been one of the most impressive players. I think one of the things that with the new dynamics of the tour is any player that plays their way from the Korn Ferry status up to the signature. I mean, there's no faking it because you don't get a lot of opportunities. You are maximizing your opportunities. And that's a super impressive feat.
But I also think that the 2026, those changes that go into effect that year, I think will help have more interplay with the Korn Ferry guys getting into the signatures. Because I think the problem this year you saw with, KFT grads getting boxed out of early season events is it also boxes you out of the Aon, the Swing 5, and the next 10, and those opportunities to get into signatures. Now with the smaller field sizes, if those guys are getting into Sony and they're getting into more West Coast events, it gives them more chances to get into the signatures and kind of get that immediate boost up. I think early in the season, guys were kind of boxed out of those. So I think, too, it'll help the Korn Ferry Tour players, if they're playing well start of the year, get into the signatures and maybe make an impact right away.
And the other part of that, too, Sean, that has gone, I feel like, way under the radar is that they've changed the point system starting in 2026 to where this difference in points between signature events and non-signature is going to be narrower, which is only going to help the KFT guys more.
Yeah. Because like that Aon next 10, it's the next 10 guys who aren't yet exempt in the FedEx Cup. I mean, if you get off to a great start to the year, you just sit in that for all season and get into the signatures. So a great start can get you into the signatures if you missed out like top 50 FedEx Cup from the previous year.
All right, Joseph, anything else in your notes?
My notebook is pretty much empty. Sean, did you have anything else? I know you wanted to take a few shots at Matt McCarty.
I watched him play with Ludwig and Luke, and it was 9 holes. He seemed to struggle in the wind. I saw him holding his elbow at one point, might have been injured, but it was Ludwig and Luke, I think, shot 64 and 65, and he shot 75, and he just seemed to he just seemed to really to struggle on the win. He shot 75. And, it'll be interesting to see. It's a guy who obviously won 3 times on the Korn Ferry Tour. He won at Black Desert, which kind of a desert course. He's from Scottsdale. Seemed pretty pristine conditions. And I think, the next step for him is going to be just learning to play in different conditions. When I tweeted about Ludwig and Luke, and Tron accused me of, slandering Matt McCarty by not mentioning him with them, someone replied like, "Oh, did he hit his stock high draw all day?" And so I don't know who that was. I don't know who it was, but
they seem an anonymous account.
They seem to know his game. But this is a guy too who I think. You're talking about a guy who won once in his college career at Santa Clara, and 4 years later is like a top 50 player in the world, a PGA Tour winner. So kind of like I said before about guys continuing to get better. Just like some guys might learn new short game shots. Like it's a guy who could develop some shots. He has a 2-year exemption to work on getting better, which is huge. But I think it seems like, he cleaned up in birdie fests, and maybe the next step is making a more well-rounded game for the wind and for different conditions.
All right. Matt McCarty minute at the end here. Yeah, I mean, like, again, there are some domes. Like maybe he's the PGA West specialist.
And you can make a good career winning in domes. And then, the thing that separates, the top 10, top 20 is that, like we've talked about, they can win in any conditions on any golf course. But Matt McCarty with his current game has put together a great year. He's won 4 times. So yeah, I think just the more shots you have, the more opportunities you have, right? But
you know what my favorite thing about Matt McCarty is?
No.
Do you know where he lives full time?
Not Scottsdale?
Chicago.
Interesting. He did give my son a ball, so I fully respect that. I wish him nothing but the best. It just seemed like, he's made a quick rise.
I hope your first assignment in 2025 is a big Matt McCarty profile.
Kevin Price actually is on that, so we're fine. But this feels like the Xander. This feels like the Xander 2018 thing. It's going to come back to bite me.
Overrated. Xander's overrated. You and Porath. It was a great moment on this pod. I was firmly entrenched in Xander stock, and it's really paid off long-term gain here.
One of the more interesting things is really the fate of the 3-time winners on the Korn Ferry Tour, the guys that get that promotion.
Wes Bryan.
Who
was the guy that got it? Who's the all-time Korn Ferry Tour player? Got it. Nick Flanagan, right?
Nick Flanagan. Jason Gore got it. Jason Gore did the same thing that Matt did. He won 3 times and he won quickly on tour. So it's just
it's a bad thing to win 3 times.
I don't think it is. I don't know what it's. You would think that winning 3 times. I don't know. You would think the results would be different for the guys who won 3 times on the Korn Ferry Tour, but it's not.
Maybe it shouldn't be the metric that we promote players. Then maybe like I always laugh. It's like like you could just finish like second every event on the Korn Ferry Tour. Have your card locked up by event 4, and not.
Well, I think we should go the other way. I think we should have a 2-win promotion. Once you've won twice, you've locked your card up. Let's go.
I think once you lock your card up, you should be eligible to play in any tour. You should be eligible to play in any tour event and be at the bottom of the. Like, to me, they should be ahead of 126. Once you've locked up your Korn Ferry Tour card or your PGA Tour card, like, go. And once you're on the Americas and locked up your PGA or your Korn Ferry Tour card, you should be able to play up. Like, we should be constantly putting people up once they've earned their spot. But that's not my decision. So
you're a big global currency guy. You just want like everyone to use the euro or something.
I just want free flow. I want free flow. It doesn't make sense that the PGA Tour operates all these tours and we don't have a point system that.
So I do. I think, because of, like we talked about, variety in venues, I'm less in favor of this universal currency that you speak of with points.
Well, I might have to kick you off the podcast then. I'm joking. Why aren't you in favor of it?
Well, I do think you can create a situation too where you get someone. stuck in kind of a Netherland. I mean, I do think like with Korn Ferry Tour, if you graduate as soon as you get 2 wins, then you lock that guy, I guess, in order on the points list in the order they graduate. So if you were the first one up, you just keep that number 1 spot.
Well, you wouldn't get in every week on tour.
Right, but then are you playing between both tours? You're playing 40 events. So nobody wants to be in.
Well, you don't have to play.
You're not going to turn it. I mean, you're not going to turn it down. I think you talked to the guys. You mentioned it on the pod with Joseph and Ryan French. One of the worst places to be is kind of that you're stuck in the autonomous zone or whatever between PGA Tour and Korn Ferry Tour, and you're not sure which way to go. And
I think all this would be less of a problem if the KFT had more resources poured into it, probably. And then those golfers who are on the Korn Ferry Tour could make a little bit better of a living and not be as desperate to get up onto the PGA Tour. I agree with you, Andy, though. If you've already locked up your PGA Tour card, just put them on the PGA Tour. As long as they're not, to Sean's point, getting stuck between where if you're playing on both tours, you're disadvantaging yourself long term. Like, I don't think that's the solution, but I don't know. If they've already locked up, they're going to be one of the top 20 on the KFT. Why not give them some reps on the PGA Tour?
I don't know. It just doesn't make any sense to me. Why? Like, I also don't get why, like, if I'm like 75th on the Korn Ferry Tour and I qualify for the U.S. Open and I finish 10th or 11th in the U.S. Open, why I don't get points on the Korn Ferry Tour?
You do get points.
What do they get now?
They changed it. I don't remember the exact, but you get points.
You get points.
It
should be if I do that and I qualify for a tour event, I should get them. Like, what? That doesn't make any sense. If I play a tour and I don't get points,
you should never play well in a tour event and that hurts you.
Yeah,
like that doesn't make a lot of sense.
Makes no sense whatsoever.
Sean's in a bad.
At some point, you got to pick you're on the tour. You're on. I don't know.
It's the same organization.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but I mean, it's not like. I mean, in Major League Baseball, if you hit 400 at AAA, like, yeah, you'll get called up, but hitting 400 at AAA doesn't help you at all. It gets you called up, but it doesn't count towards your stats in Major League Baseball.
That's not.
But if you get called up, if you get called up for an injury, so you get that cup of coffee and you hit 3 homers in a week, that are going to keep you up there.
Yeah, it's the other direction.
Right. I think. I'm advocating for the guys. Like, it's kind of like the PGA Tour U. That guy gets status for the year that he turns pro in June, and then he has status also for the following year. So, like, if you won twice on the Korn Ferry Tour, you would go up to the PGA Tour, and then you'd also have your status for all of the next year. I think that you sometimes posit that I'm against is like this free flow where you're going back and forth, relegated every 4 weeks. That's chaos.
That's the 1,000-person tour. That's the 1,000-person tour.
No, but you've advocated for this constant in-season relegation. I'm like, that's just chaos, and guys don't know where they're going. And
that's great. Well, if you're a top player, you know where you're going.
Sure,
it's the only person people that have earned to know where they're going. If you're a guy that, let's say the number 2 player from the Korn Ferry Tour misses like 4 straight cuts to start his year, you're just giving up on him. He's back down to the Korn Ferry Tour. I mean, golf doesn't work that way. I don't know. It's just back down, get hot, stay hot, play your way up, and then eventually you're safe. And then you get to set your schedule, and then you better keep playing well. It should be just cutthroat as hell.
But I don't agree with that. I think that's chaos.
I think if you took out the players, if you ran this like any other sport, which pretty much minimize player concerns, like they are the smallest bargaining chip at the table. Like if you would go to a tour that just like had like relegation's like probably the most compelling thing about golf outside of winning and majors. So
I agree, but I think you got to give a guy. Okay, I'm all for calling guys up. Like if they excel right away on the Korn Ferry Tour, let's give them a chance, call them up. But the immediate, like at some point, if a guy earned his tour card, you got to give him a fair shake. You can't just threaten him with relegation like 4 weeks in. Like, hey man, you're out. That's kind of what the reshuffle. Like they have the reshuffle where like you move up and down the priority ranking, but you still have a tour card.
I think you're misunderstanding what I want. Everybody gets a fair shake once they earn their spot. But
you want them down after like 5 bad weeks, man. That's not a fair shake.
Well, you could come up, and then you could go back down, and you could play well, and you come right back up.
And that's chaos. But then how do you plan where they play the next season?
Well, planning is a privilege of great play.
I'm mostly with you on this one, Sean.
Just chaos. It's just absolute chaos.
All right. Sean, do you have anything you're working on, or are you just kind of planning out next year?
I'm focused. My focus right now is a big. We're doing a documentary on Scotty Scheffler's 2024 season. It was pretty good,
wow.
so we felt like we should memorialize it. So I'm a filmmaker now.
Oh, look at you!
I mean, with a lot of support from great people.
Do you get a new title?
I don't think so.
It should be a filmmaker.
Filmmaker.
What is it now? Is it lead writer still?
Lead, editorial.
Lead, editorial. Lead, editorial, filmmaker.
I guess lead's a fairly common title in the biz. So then we have a lot of leads here, great people, and then you just have whatever their department is. So I'm the words man.
All right, and filmmaker for this pod. We'll give you filmmaker in your title too. All right. Thank you, Sean, for all of your time. Thank you for, I appreciate people poking holes in my ideas, calling my bullshit.
I'm glad that you're willing to listen to constructive criticism.
Oh, I welcome it. I like people telling me I'm an idiot. That's it's a refreshing thing.
I don't think I called you an idiot. I disagreed.
Yeah, that's the world spins around on congenial disagreements. Is that the right word? Did I use the right words there?
Yeah. Perfect. Not congealed. Congealed disagreements would be the wrong word.
All right, Sean, thank you. Joseph, thank you for your time. That's your fall wrap up there. And we'll be back after the holidays with a new episode. Thank you to PJ Clark for editing and producing this podcast. If you're looking to shop, we've got Black Friday deals going up this week. So check out the Fried Egg Pro Shop, and there are deals galore and new merch galore.